Most people probably only know two things about Vitesse Arnhem. One, they're from the Netherlands, and two, they were a feeder club for Chelsea for a number of years, with the likes of Nemanja Matic, Dominic Solanke and Mason Mount being among the litany of Chelsea players who helped Vitesse to finish in the top half of the Eredivisie for 11 straight seasons, regularly qualifying for Europe. Vitesse finished fourth in the Eredivisie, above Feyenoord, as recently as the 2020-21 season, during COVID, and they won their first and only ever major trophy, the KNVB Cup, in 2017, with a Ricky van Wolfswinkel brace helping them to a 2-0 win against AZ in the final. My apologies to any Norwich City fans who might be watching, if that name gave them any flashbacks. Real football aficionados may know that Vitesse enjoyed a golden era during the 1990s, reaching the UEFA Cup round of 16 in successive seasons, where they came up against the likes of Sporting and Real Madrid, that they helped to nurture and develop the likes of Philip Cocu, Roy Mackay and club record sale Wilfred Bonney, and last but not least, if you are a real Anorak, you might even know that Vitesse Arnhem isn't actually their name. Vitesse's real name is Stichting Betaald Voetbal Vitesse Arnhem, SBV Vitesse for short, or more commonly, just Vitesse. Vitesse Arnhem is how the club is known to the rest of the world, or sometimes, rather dismissively, just Chelsea B. But in the Netherlands, Vitesse are nicknamed FC Hollywood on the Rhine. That's because the club's history is packed full of so much drama and scandal that even some Hollywood screenwriters might dismiss it as being too unrealistic. The second oldest active football club in the Netherlands, after Fortuna Sittard, Vitesse were founded in 1892, and between 1898 and 1915, they reached 5 Dutch Championship playoffs or finals by virtue of winning the Eerste East, remarkably, without winning a single one of them. Over a century on, Vitesse have still never been crowned as Dutch champions. Vitesse really became synonymous with the Hollywood tag during the 1980s and 90s though, under charismatic and ambitious club president Karel Ulbers, when Vitesse almost went bust in the 80s, enjoyed a miraculous revival in the 90s, and built a stadium with the world's first fully retractable pitch, since replicated by the likes of Tottenham and Real Madrid. Power battles, leadership disputes, and severe financial trouble following an infamous fraud case led to Vitesse becoming the first Dutch club to fall into foreign ownership in 2010, setting in motion a strange change of events which has thrown Vitesse's very existence into doubt. Last month, Vitesse, who were already bottom of the Eredivisie table, were hit with an enormous 18-point deduction by the KNVB. It is the largest points deduction in Dutch football history, and with only a few games of the season remaining, it gave Vitesse an overall points tally for the campaign of -1. That was enough to confirm the club's relegation, bringing a 35-year stay in the Eredivisie to an abrupt and painful end. But in reality, the real pain for Vitesse may only just have begun. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Arnhem, a city which is home to unexpected heathlands, natural sand dunes, and a 130-year-old football club in crisis, as we take a look at how Vitesse went from 4th in the Eredivisie as recently as the 2020-21 season, and the Conference League quarter-finals in 2021-22, beating Tottenham, Anderlecht and Rapid Vienna, to dead last this season, even before their deduction, why they have been hit with the harshest punishments in their history of Dutch football, and how all roads, seemingly, lead back to this man. I mentioned in the introduction that Vitesse found themselves in financial trouble back in 2010, not for the first time, following a fraud case, and became the first club in the Netherlands to fall under foreign ownership. Foreign ownership may seem as natural as the sun rising and setting and the tides of the seas here in England, where not just foreign companies and billionaires, but actually nation-states owning clubs has somehow been allowed to be normalised, but in other countries, it remains a novel and taboo idea. Most Eredivisie clubs are owned by their fans, a foundation, a local business, or, in Ajax's case, thousands of investors by virtue of the fact that their shares are publicly traded on the Euronext Amsterdam, formerly known as the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. In fact, even to this day, some 14 years on from Vitesse becoming the first foreign-owned Eredivisie club, they are still one of only two majority foreign-owned clubs in the top flight of Dutch football, along with Fortuna Sittard. Even then, Fortuna Sittard are technically majority Dutch-owned, but Netherlands-based Principian Holding, who own 65% of the club, are a holding company owned by the club's actual Turkish owners. The point being, this isn't the norm in the Netherlands, so when Vitesse were taken over by retired Georgian footballer Merab Jordania, there was a lot of suspicion among Vitesse supporters and within the Dutch media. As it turned out, they were right to be suspicious. In his first press conference, Jordania raised eyebrows by promising that Vitesse would lift the Eredivisie title within the next 3 years. This was a club in financial disarray, which had never won an Eredivisie title before, competed in the Champions League, or even finished second. The previous season, Vitesse finished 14th, only narrowly avoiding relegation, and a pretty significant 54 points behind title winners FC Twente. Aside from the deluded ramblings, there was also confusion as to the source of Jordania's wealth, given the scale of his ambition and his history of employment. Jordania spent his entire career, with the exception of 5 games in Iceland where he retired, playing in his native Georgia while Georgia was still part of the Soviet Union. Many athletes lived well in the USSR, receiving generous benefits and salaries up to 2.5 times the national average, but they weren't rich by any means. Between 1998 and 2005, Jordania was the president of the Georgian Football Federation, and in 2003, he took charge of the Georgian national team in 3 Euro 2004 qualifiers on an interim basis. Again, he may well have been well paid, but it was hard to see how he could have accumulated the necessary resources to have such a transformative impact upon Vitesse as he alleged. That wasn't the only thing which didn't quite add up. Jordania was let go by the Georgian Football Federation in 2005 after he was arrested on suspicion of embezzling £700,000 out of Dinamo Tbilisi, the biggest and most successful club in Georgia. Jordania had also been arrested for tax evasion in 2003, but the Georgian Football Federation seemingly didn't consider that to be a sackable offence. It was reported that, in 2009, Jordania had founded a company called MJ Georgia, which claimed to be involved in player trading, representation, and media rights operating in the former Soviet Union. Neither the modest career, alleged embezzlement of £700,000, nor the newly founded obscure business reeked of a high-rolling billionaire. And before Jordania had even completed his takeover of Vitesse, there were rumours abound that he had links to and was merely acting as a front for Russian oligarch and then Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. In fact, in his very first press conference following the takeover, the same one where he promised to win the Eredivisie in the next 3 years, Jordania also told reporters, quote, "By the way, I want to clear up that Roman Abramovich is not involved in this deal, although he is a friend of mine." End quote. I'm not joking, that is a direct quote. A truly iconic, "My Roman Abramovich is not involved in this deal" shirt has a lot of people asking questions already answered by my shirt moment. Surprisingly, people didn't just take Jordania at face value, and suspicions of Abramovich's involvement didn't go away. To be honest, if anything, they were only heightened when Chelsea sent half of their under-23s on loan to Vitesse, but we shouldn't skip too far ahead. The KNVB carried out an investigation following widespread speculation in 2010, but could find no evidence of formal ties between Vitesse and Abramovich. Purely coincidentally, in 2013, Jordania sold Vitesse to another close associate of Roman Abramovich. Upon acquiring the club, new owner, Alexander Chigirinsky, seemingly confirmed, as many suspected, that Jordania was just a frontman all along, revealing that he had helped fund his takeover in 2010. Unlike Jordania, Alexander Chigirinsky was independently wealthy. His brother, Shalva Chigirinsky, estimated to be worth $2.3 billion at the time, was a business partner of Abramovich's. Like Abramovich, Shalva was the majority shareholder of an oil company, which he later sold to Gazprom, and in 2000, Shalva and Abramovich founded a joint venture together called Sibneft Yugra. The relationship later soured, with Shalva filing a lawsuit against Abramovich, accusing him of diluting his firm's shares. In the dispute between Shalva and Abramovich, however, Shalva's brother Alexander, who bought Vitesse from Jordania in 2013 and claimed to have been involved since 2010, came down on the side of Abramovich. If Jordania was once a placid stooge of Abramovich's, by 2013 he was a lover scorned. In a parting shot fired after relinquishing his control of Vitesse, Jordania stated that Vitesse's 2012-13 title challenge was hindered because, quote, London didn't want that. It's worth noting that Vitesse finished 4th in the 2012-13 season, 12 points behind the champions Ajax, so it wasn't that much of a title challenge, but nonetheless, coming from Mr. I want to clear up that Roman Abramovich is not involved in this deal himself, it was pretty clear what Jordania was insinuating. Jordania hinted that Abramovich didn't want Vitesse to win the league because he didn't want the club to qualify for the Champions League. UEFA rules are meant to prohibit clubs with the same owners from competing in the same competition, though we have since found out quite how flimsy those regulations are, and Abramovich, allegedly, feared a potential UEFA investigation if both Chelsea and Vitesse qualified for the Champions League. Jordania's comments prompted a second KNVB investigation into Vitesse and their undisclosed ties with Abramovich, but once again, they failed to find anything concrete.
Well, you can't grow concrete.
You can.
In March 2014, Jordania was banned from Vitesse's stadium and the club's £10 million training centre, which he himself inaugurated the previous season for 3 years, for allegedly threatening to cut Vitesse's new chief executive, Guus de Witt's fingers off, for which he subsequently apologised, which was good of him. We all say things that we don't mean, in the heat of an argument. I hate you, you're not my real dad, I am going to saw the digits off your hands, you know, that kind of thing. On the pitch, meanwhile, the Chelsea players kept coming. In the summer of 2013, then Vitesse, future Borussia Dortmund, and current PSV title-winning head coach Peter Bosz, when questioned on Vitesse's strategy in the transfer market, responded bluntly, quote, "There aren't many options, so we end up knocking on Chelsea's door." End quote. He wasn't joking. That season, Vitesse took 5 players on loan from Chelsea, almost half a starting 11, including serial Chelsea loanees Gael Kakuta and Lucas Piazzon.
They're just phenomenal to watch. And people try and make comparisons of who's better, etc. Just enjoy them, man.
Vitesse fell from 4th place to 6th, and whilst other teams complained to the league about the perceived unfairness of Vitesse's relationship with Chelsea, there was a growing sense of discontent among some Vitesse supporters, despite the undoubted calibre of some of the players that they had taken on loan from Chelsea, that their historic club had seemingly been reduced to the status of someone else's satellite club. In the 2016-17 season, however, they were given something to cheer about. Vitesse appointed former Dutch international and ADO Den Haag boss Henk Fraser as Peter Boz's replacement, and in his debut campaign, Vitesse won their first trophy in the 125-year history of the club. Vitesse had found it difficult to integrate Chelsea loanees as they came and went with such speed in previous seasons, creating a split between the permanent and temporary members of the club's squad. To combat that, they signed the likes of Nathan and Lewis Baker on 2-year loan deals instead of 1. Following a season settling in, they reaped the rewards in the 16-17 campaign, but it was Ricky van Wolfswinkel, a Vitesse Academy graduate, signed from Norwich for just €600,000, who had themselves paid a potential €12 million for the centre-forward, who made the biggest impact of all. Van Wolfswinkel scored 23 goals in 37 games. Only Nicolai Jorgensen scored more goals that season in the Eredivisie. The Dutchman's most important goals, however, came in the final of the KNVB Cup, where he scored twice as Vitesse beat AZ 2-0 to make history. While all of this was going on, though, a cloud continued to linger over Vitesse. Previously undisclosed court documents showed that 2 of the people most intimately tied to Vitesse's takeover in 2010 were also close confidants of Roman Abramovich. Eugene Tenenbaum, who made key decisions regarding the deal to buy Vitesse and gave the financial instructions to proceed with the purchase, was described on Chelsea's own club website as, quote, one of Roman Abramovich's closest associates. Tenenbaum was one of only 3 directors on the Chelsea board, alongside Abramovich's lawyer Bruce Buck and his chief executive Marina Granovskaya. Prior to that, Tenenbaum was employed as the head of corporate finance at Sibneft, an oil company responsible for most of Abramovich's enormous fortune, which he sold to Gazprom for $13 billion in 2005, as well as sitting on the board of Evraz, a UK incorporated but Moscow-headquartered steel mining company, 31% of which is owned by Abramovich. Described as Abramovich's right-hand man, Tenenbaum was born in Ukraine, but he was sanctioned by the UK government, along with Abramovich, following Russia's invasion. That didn't stop him from being granted permission by the government to sell his £16 million mansion in Surrey, of course. The other individual involved in the takeover of Vitesse was Paul Hagren. According to The Guardian, Hagren was tasked with carrying out due diligence, appointing Dutch lawyers to oversee the deal, and reporting to Tenenbaum when it came to financial details. Hagren became the secretary of Millhouse Capital in 2002, Abramovich's primary British registered holding company, with over $1 billion in assets under management, and in 2004, he also became the secretary of Fordstam Limited, the holding company that Abramovich employed as a vehicle for his ownership of, and cash injections into Chelsea. The case against Vitesse, as was widely reported at the time, appeared to be overwhelming. But this time, there would be no KNVB investigation. You might have thought that Vitesse would have tried to be a little bit more discreet about the extent of Abramovich's alleged involvement at this point, but you'd be very wrong. After Henk Fraser announced that he wouldn't be extending his contract at the club, Vitesse appointed Russian head coach Leonid Slutsky, pictured here alongside yours truly, back when my hair was especially long even for me, as their new head coach. I'm not just saying that wasn't discreet because both Abramovich and Slutsky are Russian, the closeness of their relationship would be difficult to overstate. Following more than 7 years at CSKA Moscow, where he won 3 Russian Premier League titles, as well as managing Russia's national team at Euro 2016, Abramovich, a friend of Slutsky's for more than 10 years, tried to fast-track him for Premier League management. Abramovich gave Slutsky a house in London, permanent access to Chelsea's Cobham training ground, and hospitality tickets to whichever matches he wanted to attend throughout the length and breadth of England. Slutsky literally said of Abramovich in April 2017, and I quote, "He is like my agent, the best agent in the world." End quote. The long-term ambition was for Slutsky to become the first Russian to manage in the Premier League, possibly even with one eye on him one day getting the Chelsea job. In June 2017, Slutsky replaced Marco Silva as the new head coach at recently relegated Hull City, hence that long-haired photograph that you just saw. Slutsky used his relationship with Abramovich to bring 3 players on loan from Chelsea, Ola, Michael Hector, and Fikayo Tomori, but he was sacked after just 6 months in charge, with the Tigers sat 20th in the championship table, only 3 points above the relegation zone. Slutsky inherited a challenging set of circumstances in fairness, as the Hull squad was decimated following relegation, but he didn't exactly help himself on occasion by playing a kamikaze brand of football and refusing to acknowledge the concept of defending. The same year that Slutsky was appointed at Vitesse, 2018, the club underwent a third change of ownership in 8 years, as Russian oligarch Valery Oif took the club off Alexander Chigirinsky's hands. Now, you're going to want to be sitting down for this because it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks, but Vitesse's new owner had very close ties to Roman Abramovich. Oif was the former vice president of Sibneft, Abramovich's oil company, which you're probably sick of hearing about at this stage, before becoming the CEO of Highland Gold Mining Company, one of the world's leading gold mining companies. In 2007, Millhouse Capital, Abramovich's UK holding company, of which Paul Hagren was the secretary, acquired 40% of Highland Gold Mining Company's shares. Oylin also sat on the board at Gazprom, the largest company in Russia, and the 42nd largest in the world in terms of revenue. Since becoming the first foreign-owned Eredivisie team 14 years ago, Vitesse have consistently spent beyond their means, by which I mean, just like Chelsea under Abramovich, they have required fairly intense owner funding, certainly by Dutch standards, having spent a lot more money than the club has organically generated. About a week after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Vitesse released a club statement which read, quote, "Everyone at Vitesse is deeply shocked by the horrifying situation in Ukraine. Vitesse speaks out for peace and finds it heartbreaking to hear, read, and see the news from Ukraine. Our thoughts are with everyone in Ukraine. Every Vitessenar eagerly hopes that a peaceful solution will be found as soon as possible." End quote. They also added that the statement reflected Oylin's own views. Within months, however, and despite not being among the Russian oligarchs to be sanctioned by the EU, it was reported that Oylin had withdrawn his funding of Vitesse and put the club up for sale. Over the summer, Vitesse lost 3 of their back 4, and from a 6th place finish the previous season and a run to the round of 16 of the UEFA Conference League, where they were only narrowly beaten by Roma, Vitesse fell to 10th last season, their lowest league finish since Jordania's first season in 2010-11. In September 2022, American investment firm The Common Group announced that they had agreed a deal to buy the club. Founded by Coley Parry, the Common Group also owns stakes in English third-tier side Leyton Orient, Belgian second-tier team K. Patro Isden Mas McKellen, and the sports data firm StatsBomb. Although the Common Group agreed to buy Vitesse in September 2022, in February 2024, the KNVB rejected their takeover bid, owing to doubts about the group's equity capital and the origins of their funds. In some ways, just on a much smaller scale, it is similar to the situation with fellow American firm and multi-club ownership model 777 Partners at Everton, who have already loaned the Toffees more than £200 million, but have so far been denied Premier League approval to actually complete their takeover of the club in a deal worth more than £550 million. Everton, like Vitesse of course, have been hit with a points deduction this season. The Common Group and Coley Parry are incensed at the KNVB's decision, complaining in particular about the Federation's demands that TCG prove that they have no connection with Abramovich. Parry claims that the KNVB have put him in the impossible position of trying to prove a negative, but it's worth noting that as far as the licensing committee is concerned, that isn't all that Parry has failed to illustrate. In March 2023, reporting by The Guardian and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism seemingly revealed Abramovich's involvement in Vitesse once and for all. By following the money, The Guardian and the FBIJ alleged that Abramovich funneled at least €117 million into Vitesse following the club's takeover in 2010 via a complex series of offshore accounts. For a third time, therefore, the KNVB began investigating Vitesse's ties to the now sanctioned Abramovich. Possibly the strangest thing about all of this is that there was nothing to stop Abramovich from directly owning both Chelsea and Vitesse, other than the flimsy and easily circumvented UEFA rules regarding dual ownership in their competitions. Though the KNVB mentioned Vitesse's relationship with Abramovich when they handed the club an 18-point deduction, stating that Vitesse had failed to provide sufficient evidence that those 2023 reports were untrue, it was really more of a footnote to their charge sheet. Far more significant, and far more damning, was the fact that, as the KNVB put it, Vitesse had persistently fallen short of meeting the requirements of licensing regulations over an extended period. In layman's terms, Dutch clubs are required to present the KNVB with updated financial reports and plans for the Federation's approval, and Vitesse's correspondence had left a lot to be desired. One half-year finance report, the KNVB found, was not just inaccurate but deliberately misleading, failing to disclose the termination of Vitesse's agreement with their banking partners Revolut, materially altering their financial outlook. In that sense, the charges against Vitesse are more similar, though, again, on a much smaller scale, to those levelled against Manchester City by the Premier League. It's for that reason that, despite being hit with the largest points deduction in the history of Dutch football, which put them on a negative points tally for the season and brought an automatic end to their uninterrupted 35-year stay in the Eredivisie, Vitesse announced that they wouldn't be appealing their deduction, owing to ongoing fears of losing their professional licence entirely. That almost happened just 12 months ago. Vitesse's stadium, the Gelredome, was built with a capacity of 30,000 ahead of Euro 2000, featuring the world's first fully retractable pitch. The Gelredome's adaptability has made it an ideal venue for headline concerts, with the likes of Rihanna, the Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney all having performed there since it opened in 1998. It also came at a significant cost, however, and more importantly, Vitesse don't actually own it. Dutch real estate entrepreneur Van der Kuyt, owner of the Nestedgroeper, acquired the Gelredome in 2018, and in 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he tried to buy Vitesse from Valeri Oif. Kuyt lost out to the Common Group, and in 2023, Vitesse's lease on the stadium was up for renewal. After talks between Kuyt and the Common Group broke down, who, don't forget, don't actually own Vitesse due to their takeover not having yet been approved, the KNVB threatened to revoke Vitesse's professional licence. The top two leagues in the Netherlands are both professional, so losing their licence would mean at least relegation to the third tier for Vitesse. In the end, that problem got resolved, but Vitesse are far from being out of the woods just yet. There are other investigations into the club which are still ongoing. Their ownership situation is yet to be resolved, meaning Vitesse are still technically owned by the absent Valeri Oif, who refuses to fund the club. Meanwhile, Coley Parry has taken his complaints up directly with the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs, and Vitesse only have until May 17th to submit a feasible business plan to the KNVB for approval ahead of next season, this time without Eredivisie revenue. As I was recording this video, Vitesse launched a crowdfunding campaign asking supporters and businesses to donate as the club fights to secure its future. Former players Wilfried Bony, Milo Rashica and Lewis Baker are among those who have donated. Vitesse are believed to be in 19 million euros of debt, with their loans from the Common Group reportedly carrying 12% interest. It's a truly desperate situation, and it's one that it's hard to see how Vitesse can find their way out of. Unlike a lot of Eredivisie clubs, Vitesse don't have an amateur department, so if they were to lose their licence and drop out of the Eredivisie and the Eerste, they really would be starting from rock bottom. Abramovich, meanwhile, following sanctions, now lives in a £20 million mansion in Istanbul with 4 of his 16 mega yachts, worth in excess of $1 billion, anchored nearby along Turkey's western Mediterranean coast. If Dutch football fans distrusted foreign ownership in 2010, the case of Vitesse, who will do well just to survive this summer, is unlikely to have changed many of their minds. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, obviously I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and it goes without saying at this stage, make sure that you're subscribed not just to this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Harmer, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now. And you can also find me on Twitter, Instagram or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three. And all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.